Looks like we've got 12 people. Maybe we can all do some introductions. Sherry, you want to start? And then maybe I'll call out people's name to say, who you are and where you work or where you're calling in from.
Sure. I'm Sherry DeFesh, and I'm the event coordinator for the School of Arts and Humanities and the Center for Ethics and Leadership.
Thank you. Denise, Denise Rocha, you want to go next?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Denise Rocha, and I'm the Director of Events and Special Projects in the Office of University Advancement at St. Ed's.
Great. And Denise, the other Denise, I see you're looks like in a living room somewhere. Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Denise Myers. I am a sophomore in St. Edward's, and I'm actually at my house in Edinburgh, Texas. So South Texas.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Steve Musselman. I'm one of Jack's brothers. He's got a whole arsenal of them. I'm a public defender for the state of Maryland, and as we talk, I'll explain how Maryland functions. There are under 400 of us around the state as a statewide office. I do mostly felony practice, so I'll walk through that as well. But again, I've been both a prosecutor and public defender, and Jack just wanted me to do a day in the life and help students understand, gee, what is it like? What's typical now with this virus? Is it something I have an interest in? What didn't you know at 18, 19, 20 that you wish you did know? So when we get to that, I can walk through that as well.
Thank you. And if you're just joining us, if you could silence your mic. So we're going to introduce ourselves one at a time, and then we'll jump right in and Steve will talk about his job. Anthony, I see you're somewhere. You want to tell us where you're calling from and what you do? Hi.
Okay. I'm an alum from about 50 years ago, a little more than that. Retired professor of sociology, and I make a calendar of events for a newsletter for Pax Christi, Texas, and I often include things from this series. I've been trying to go up when they were in live format, but it never worked out. But I do follow news to the extent I can. So that's what.
Thank you. A bit of a wind tunnel effect there, but I caught 90% of it. So I'm glad to have alums here. It's not just about the students. Karen, you want to go next? I'm just introduce like where you're from and what you do maybe.
Yes, I'm Karen Dix. I work in the University Advancement Department, and I'm calling in from Pflugerville.
Okay, Lauren, you want to say hi and where you're calling from? And a student, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a junior. I study rhetoric and writing here, and I'm calling from Austin. I'm sheltering in place here at Austin.
Okay. Any chance you're pre-law?
Yes.
Okay. And did other Denise Mayers, are you pre-law as well or no?
No, I am law enforcement.
Okay. All right. So Stephen, when I do a campus event, we like to go to the students first and I tell the faculty to shut up. They can ask questions second or third. So maybe we'll ask Lauren and Denise especially, and maybe Anthony as well as an alum. Let's see. Mickey, I see you're joined. Can you unmute your mic? Tell us where you're calling from and what you do.
Hi, I'm a sophomore at St. Ed's. I'm calling from Pflugerville as well. I'm majoring in forensic science, but I have a class with Professor Woody, who teaches mock trial. So, yeah.
Cool. Are you pre-law?
No.
Okay, good. You'll keep your immortal soul. That's better. Catherine and Steve can comment on that if you want. Catherine, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Catherine Ader. I am the chair of the Department of Performing Arts. And last semester, I was on a jury. And because of a Facebook comment that Jack made about public defenders and all that, to me, I'm very interested in all of it. There you go.
Great. Okay, super. Well, Steve, that tells you where people are coming from. Vanessa, are you there?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, where are you calling from? And tell us. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a student from St. Edward's University. I'm a criminal justice major, and I also came from Professor Woody's class for mock trial.
Terrific. Okay, and Steve, Woody Rue is, I think she worked for a prosecutor's office, and she teaches for us. I don't see her here yet. The screen name says Malachi. Is that right? I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. Are you there?
Yes, Malachi.
Where are you calling from, and what do you do?
So I'm calling from Harlingen, Texas. Also from the Valley. I am a student at St. Edward's University, also from Woody LaRue's mock trial class, and I have trying to get a criminal justice degree, and currently in my senior year.
Okay. Avantika, are you there? I know you're in my class. Hello.
Hey, my name is Avantika. I am currently studying computer science and political science, and I'm a senior at St. Ed's, and I'm interested in law, so I'm just trying to see if it's a fit for me or not.
Okay, terrific. Let's see if we missed anybody. Steve, I'm about getting ready to say 15, 20 minutes. What's your job like? How does it work? Why is it important? How are you handling the sheltering thing? And after 15 or 20 minutes, we'll ask them some questions. So Steve, the screen is yours, and I can share your office webpage if you want. Okay, go.
So my name's Steve Musselman. I've been an attorney for about 20 years. Most of that practice has been in the area of criminal defense, and I'll walk through that, how I function now as a public defender. I also represented children in the foster care system. That touches on some of this conversation again, because a lot of what I do and what students may find interesting is why lawyers exist in the court system. Why do we have lawyers helping in the context of people that are facing jail? And kind of that's what I do. It's not just that they're facing jail. It's that constitutionally, you have a right to have an attorney if your liberty is at risk. Most people think of liberty in the context of their freedom. The government, the state, Texas, Maryland, the federal government wants to take away your freedom and place you behind bars. The other area that also liberty is very much involved in is with respect to your family relationships. If the government's trying to take a child from a parent, put a child into foster care, that's a fundamental right. A parent has a fundamental right to their relationship with their child, and you have a right to an attorney. So Maryland's Public Defender's Office provides attorneys in the context of both of those circumstances. And again, you'll see from our website that we try to give justice, fairness, and dignity to all. Since the 60s, and if you're taking a history class or in any law class, you're going to hear about Gideon versus Wainwright, or Gideon versus the United States, who in the 60s actually by himself in pencil and paper filed papers that went all the way to the Supreme Court demanding the help from an attorney, and said, shouldn't this be a fundamental issue for the government to give me a lawyer when my liberty or my freedom is at stake? So that's the context of it. It's a very young concept, Gideon versus Wainwright, but it's critical if you have time. I shouldn't say critical, but if you can read that, I think it's very informative why public defenders exist and what we do. In Maryland, what it's developed into is we're an office less than 700 people. I think under 400 of them are lawyers. The lawyers work around the state on the opposite side of the county prosecutor. The county prosecutor is the one who brings the charges on behalf of the state, and they're the moving party in a case. So typical for me would be if someone got arrested last night and charged, I would either get a phone call or an email saying, there's someone who qualified for a public defender parked over at the detention center, go see them, that's your new client. There's more to it. Under each state, you actually have to qualify for a public defender. In Maryland, the definition of indigency is you're making less than the federal poverty guideline. My guess is here, probably in Texas as well, probably 95% of the criminal work is done by public defenders like me or an appointed attorney from the court. I think Austin is the latest to get a public defender's office. I think it's always been private lawyers doing it. Someone can correct me if they're volunteering in one of those offices. My office welcomes that. So if there are any students here that actually had an interest in this stuff, you could easily be working in my office tomorrow, pro bono, of course, and we'd actively use you and enroll you in what we do. So the same exists in Austin or where you're from on the county level or the state level. Typical day, I'd go to the detention center. I'd introduce myself to the client. They were English speaker. If they're a non-English speaker, I'd either have an interpreter service over the phone or I'd have an interpreter meet me. The running joke in my office, because my last name is Musselman, my clients usually think I'm Muslim. So I usually start up the conversation for my Spanish-speaking clients that I'm not Muslim, but it really doesn't matter. And I'm Anglo, but I understand what you're saying because I'm a Spanish speaker. Probably 20% of my clients are Spanish-speaking, generally firstborn or recent immigrant. And how I look at what I do is that I have an ethical duty, a professional duty to represent someone in the manner I would want to be represented by someone who knew nothing. So a typical client, if I had someone from rural Honduras, when I introduce myself to her, I'll explain what I do, why I do it, that I work for the government, but I work for them. And then I have them explain to me, if I got arrested in Honduras last night, what would it look like? Usually they scare the crap out of me. If it's a non-American client, I then explain to them the court process and what I do. Again, it's going to be different in Texas. In Maryland, within 6 months of being charged with something, the case has to be resolved, meaning you have a right to have a jury trial if your freedom is at risk, if your liberty is at risk on a criminal case. And that doesn't matter if it's a drunk driving case, all the way up to a homicide case. Do things actually happen in that 6-month window? No, of course not. And I'll touch on forensics for the person that has forensics interest. Part of that initial conversation where all I know is what the client is telling me is letting them know that the government, in this, where I am, it's the county, but the government has to turn over to me everything that exists about them in the case. That generally takes 60 days where I am. So for 60 days, the client could be stuck in custody. I may file court paperwork to get them released. And during that 60-day window, as I get information from the government, the local prosecutor, I'm reviewing it with them. Often I have clients that think that it's my job to get them off, my client to get them out of jail. But your ethical duty as a lawyer is to make the government do its job, meaning before the government can take away your freedom, they're required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt you committed a crime. So again, this is what I'm doing often in the first meeting with someone. After that 60 days, we usually go to the courthouse or the courtroom where the judge confirms that that the prosecutor has given me everything that exists in the case. And the judge would then set what's called a motions date and a trial date. Motions date being anything of a constitutional nature in the case that you guys will study if you're a student, the right to remain silent, Fourth Amendment issues, search and seizure issues, right to attorney issues. Could be now with the virus, cruel and unusual punishment, being housed where there's a deadly virus. That's what I'm dealing with now. After the motions date, the trial date is set where you can only be convicted 2 ways in the United States. One is you admit your guilt, or the other is 12 people say you broke the law. So that's typical what I'm doing. I carry less than 90 cases that are everywhere along that timeline. So this morning I was at the detention center. I had a new attempted murder case, but I was also meeting with 3 clients that have medical issues that I'm hoping to get them released because the virus is, and I know it's in the Texas jails too, it's going to go like wildfire in the jails. We've had 70 people die in the prison system in the last week here in Maryland. That includes everyone from guards to staff to attorneys that go in and out to inmates. So touching on what Jack wanted me to talk about is how does this new world affect what I do? I'm wearing a face mask. I carry Clorox wipes into the jail. I see people behind glass, so in my jail, I can still see clients. My peers around the state are doing things by phone. Court is being done by phone and by video, which causes unique issues. Again, constitutionally, you have a right to be there. You have a right to face your accuser. Maryland's highest court, Texas highest court did too. The chief judge passed probably 5 orders in the last 7 days defining what the court system would look like. The first thing that she did was postponed all jury trials until June 5th. So I had clients who were ready for a week-long trial who had been waiting for 6 months or 18 months, some of them, to have their day in court, that have now been bumped out at least until June. So that's kind of what's going on. In the context of the virus, it's a whole new world, the same way that it's affected St. Edward's and your classes, what you're doing, your family relationships. The court system doesn't know what to do. A sad irony is the same time that this virus hit, Maryland's public defender's office had a virus hit our computer system. We lost everything statewide, every email, every document, every way to communicate with each other. So we all got an order to immediately leave the office and take a laptop with us. And remotely, attorneys and staff around the state, we've all been flying blind, waiting the wheel. Luckily, someone quickly there's a workplace, like Facebook has a subgroup for businesses. They quickly got that up and running so I can talk to my peers around the state. They quickly had an IT person get us all emails so we can communicate with each other. We're doing this a lot. I had an hour phone call with 150 people yesterday. What do we do the moment that this virus breaks out in your jail? You know, clients in Maryland and Texas as well, you can be held at the jail because you're poor, meaning they put a bond on you. You have to post money to get out of jail. If you were arrested tonight, some judge could say, okay, $1,000, otherwise you sit there till your court date. It's kind of offensive because rich people can get out, but poor people can't. Again, constitutional issue that you guys will discuss if that violates equal protection. However, if the person's dangerous, if it's a violent crime, a judge could hold them without bond, which then triggers some of the issues I'm dealing now. Is that cruel and unusual that we're holding people in a poisonous jail where people are dying? And that's my office's biggest concern right now. I probably have filed 5 motions, which are just papers with the court clerk, and a judge has had to address those issues for 5 of my clients. 2 of them I've gotten out. The other 3 are pending. So that's kind of a lot of what I'm doing. Again, I have a small group. I can take questions. I can keep going. But the whole point of this is I think, to help you all see a day in the life. So again, if court were in session, I'd be in court most of the day doing things along that timeline of an individual. I'd be talking to a forensic expert, a fingerprint expert, a blood splatter expert, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, educational people, mock trial people. We practice what you guys do in competitions, we do in the office with each other over the phone. So everything that each one of the students here is studying, I can speak specifically to how that's real world, what you're doing. The forensics person, I know there's only one person on, everything that you're studying, I didn't realize would come into play 20 years later. And what the standard is with respect to forensics is, if there's a scientific opinion accepted within the scientific community, then that area can be shared with the jury, meaning a blood splatter on the wall. If 50 scientists accept that splatter can be helpful to understand what happened, then a jury can hear about that issue. If 50 scientists disagree about that blood splatter, then it might be called junk science and you can't use it. But again, that's just an individual forensic issue. Types of mud, footprints, mud splatter, cultural issues. So again, there's different people here in the call that have different areas of what they're studying that 20 years from now, if you're doing what I'm doing, it's going to come into play. It just is going to come into play. I use language a lot. I represented an individual for a whole year before he told me that he was from Chiapas and Spanish was his second language. I felt like an idiot. A whole year I've been communicating with this guy, thinking he fully understood what was going on. At times I had an interpreter with me. And I think finally I had a new interpreter who's from Mexico who said, hey, by the way, Spanish is his second language. Now, again, I had an ethical duty to make sure he understands what's going on, and I probably failed him at some level. Again, that's things that you are doing now could color later on how you use it unknowingly. So again, Jack, I can
no, that's great, Steve. No, that's wonderful. That was about 15, 20 minutes. I have 100 questions in my head.
Okay.
From the prosecution's discovery obligations under Brady and what counts as due process liberty, but that's not about me. I've got Lauren, Mickey, Avantika, Vanessa. I've got a lot of students here. Since they're a small group, I guess we wouldn't have to just write in a text or raise the little hand icon. If you're a student, and then we'll get to Anthony as an alum, and then I guess faculty and staff, sorry, you're third, but you live this stuff, right? You're on campus. Students, you have any questions? You want to unmute your mic and maybe your video and launch in? I mean, Steven's really friendly. He's obviously very knowledgeable, not as smart as I am or good looking, but you can't have everything. So any questions for him?
Yeah, I had a question.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you, Stephen. That was so interesting. I also have 100 questions in my head. I'm wondering, I have an interest in pursuing linguistics for postgraduate studies, and I was curious if you could speak to how that or does not play out in law or how you've seen it.
I can give you 2 examples besides the individual from Chiapas. This is now 10 years ago, I had a very serious murder case with a Spanish speaker client from El Salvador. And I was assigned an interpreter dedicated to me by the court. So the interpreter never had to meet with the co-defendants or the prosecutor, who also needed interpreters for the witnesses or their clients. They wanted to make sure that each interpreter was in a silo and wouldn't reveal confidential communications, because anybody that works for me is bound by my ethical restraints of not revealing stuff. Well, my interpreter was the daughter of a diplomat, lucked out that she grew up all over Latin and Central America. She found 20 minutes extra in a 3-hour video interview of my client, and his word choice and slang, she understood, because she had been with her dad when he was stationed in that country and had gone to that part of the country. So linguistically, if I didn't have her, I would have failed my client. One of the issues in the case was the victim murdered with a branch or a tree limb or a stick. That was a critical issue, because in Maryland, the definitions of murder are also based on the severity of the item used. So, you know, if the jury believed it was a tree branch, that could have been a first-degree murder charge. But if it was a stick used in a fight, it was a fist fight where a stick was used. So again, depending on what your areas of linguistics are, that definitely comes into play. But language is a big deal. And I go back to, you know, the Musselman piece. Many a client asked me if I'm Muslim, many. And again, there's other ones too. I'll cross more in a cultural issue. Generally, you don't have a cultural defense to a case. And I'll use the example, there's a group of people, refugees, moved to Minnesota that are the Hmong people. I'll spell it wrong. I think it's H-U-O-M-G, but they're customarily in that part of Asia, you get married by kidnapping your wife. Well, you know, to you, it sounds culturally offensive. And there was sexual assault involved based on European and Western standards. But when that community relocated to the U.S., the custom was continued. Thank you, my speller. But again, if you have an anthropology background or sociological background, that all comes into play, and it should come into play. Should the first group of people that were prosecuted for that, should they be prosecuted? That's up to the government. How do you defend them? You know, that's, again, not in the linguistics area, but your linguistics question opens up a bigger door for me to talk about.
And just let me say, just as an aside, Lauren, that I went to college and grad school with a woman who had a PhD in linguistics and did legal studies and had an academic job until she went over to corporate side. So if you're thinking about linguistics in grad school, you can private message me later. It's an ex-person. Jenny knows about her. I told her my whole history. So, you know, there are a lot of really good linguistic schools that focus on legal stuff. So we can have that conversation later. Did he answer your question, Laura?
Yeah, that was really helpful. And I'll definitely reach out to you. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Other students, and then Lauren had a whole bunch of questions, so we can circle back around to her. Avantika, Vanessa, Mickey.
Yes, I had a question.
Go.
So going back to what you were saying about how inmates are going to be held now because everything that's happening with COVID-19, months and months from trial to get their hearing, how is that going to affect the speedy trial since they have the right for that?
The answer is we're figuring it out every day. And I have a 10-page court order signed by Maryland's highest judge where she sent this court order out to every judge in the state telling them what to do. Now, how that's interpreted is going to be up to every courthouse around my state, and that's where I come in. I'm attaching it to my written request to release people. Some people, in theory, could be in custody longer than the time associated with the crime. Well, that's odd. Why sit for 18 months if you're only going to get a 30-day sanction if guilty? But no one should be coerced into settling a case to get out. But the answer is they don't know. That's probably going to be decided once I get back to court and I can make that argument. But in the same case as Miranda or Wainwright, they all start at the lower level and then they make it up the food chain. My peers, I've been, while with you, there's been group emails going back and forth. What do we do in this case? What are people doing in this case? So I had a coworker denied a request to get her HIV full-blown AIDS client out of jail, because if that virus hits him, he'll die. I mean, he'll just die. He's serving an 18-month sentence, so he's already been sentenced to 18 months. But, you know, for humanitarian reasons, he can serve it at home. You know, I had a white girl on an 18-month sentence of a car fatality. The jail sent her home to serve her last 15 months. Why her and not this HIV guy with full-blown AIDS?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, obviously I know it's because it's white privilege. But again, I didn't stop it, that she got home. What's interesting, she was the first one out of my jail sent home. Again, probably because she's 23 and Caucasian. The prosecutor immediately filed a motion to throw her back in jail. He was outraged that the jail sent her home on a humanitarian reason without him knowing, because the law says any modification, the victim, in this case, the car fatality's family, had a right to know she was going to leave the jail. Now, my judge, I filed paperwork responding to his request, politely said, I've been given this authority by Maryland's highest judge because of the virus to make extraordinary decisions. So I'm trumping the victim notification. I'm sending her home. Was that legal for the judge to do? Who knows? I don't know. The law says victims have a right to be in court whenever there's a modification in Maryland. What the judge said was, well, I'm not modifying her. I'm just letting her serve her jail sentence at home. Again, lawyers speak because we can make up stuff. So to answer your questions, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I spent the last week with different clients saying, yeah, I don't know. But I had trial set this week. Now, some people are out of custody. There's still a speedy trial issue. But again, court was closed for a reason, as no juror is going to step foot in the courtroom. We've had, you know, Annapolis, which is a half hour from me, Anne Arundel County. After the first week the courts were closed, they revealed a juror was diagnosed, and the news wanted to know anybody that was in the room with that juror, what attorneys were in the courthouse. I mean, they're doing this tracing now. But if they had jury trials this week, no one's going to show in my building. They're not. So, but the answer to your question is no, we don't know what's going to happen.
Thank you, Steve. And for those that want to know about the sort of right to lawyer defense in criminal case, it's Anthony Lewis, the late Anthony Lewis of New York Times, wrote a book called Gideon's Trumpet about that very case. And I love Stephen's answer about not knowing, because what lawyers will say is, you know, what the Supreme Court would say when Harry Blackmun was on it, the rule of 5. You get 5 justices, you've got the law. And a lot of the stuff is just going to have to go up and down the food chain. Students, we had 2 questions.
Well, let me answer that. Let me follow that. My first job in law school was the public defender's office in Los Angeles. And there were 30 of us law students around the table. And our supervisor asked the question, you know, what's the law? And we're all around the table saying it's this, that, the other thing, citing books, what have you. And then the head trainer finally said to us, the law is what the judge says it is. You know, that's the bottom line.
That's the legal realism effect of the 1950s. And it's true. 5 justices say it's the law. It's the law. Any other students want to ask a question? We had 2 really good ones. And Stephen went a little deep on that. Oh, Denise, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Sure. This is more like towards, I guess, racism. Like, have you ever, like, has there been a point where you faced yourself with a judge who's been racist towards your client because of their race? Like, I know it's probably a yes, but like, is it more of a like discretion, or is it more, okay, because you're this, I'm just going to give you that sentence?
It's all over the board, is the answer to your question. And I tell this story, I don't own it, but my 3 best friends are 3 women of color in this one county where I worked for 5 years. And we had an older judge literally say, 100 people in the courtroom, the 3 women came walking in, and he said, oh, everybody, look, the Supremes. Again, as a non-woman of color, I knew how offensive that was. It was unbelievably offensive. Now, luckily, our boss filed a grievance against that judge. It was investigated. He got reprimanded. He kept his job. But that's racism. But with respect to directly against a client, yeah, absolutely. And I have to call it out. You know, there are issues on appeal, how racism affects the case. And if your trial judge doesn't see it and doesn't solve it, unless he or she is the offender, the higher court's supposed to. And the classic example is juries. Juries have to look like the community. So when I'm picking a jury and a prosecutor is picking a jury, you can't kick someone off for race or gender, just if that's your basis. There are too many people sent to death row by probably racist juries. I tend to like diverse juries because I think the conversation changes with more people at the table. But I also have to be careful. As a non-attorney of color, what I can say and what I can get away with is far different than friends of mine. Again, I use a coworker as my expert on those issues. I have to buy her lunch once a week. I have to ask her what I can say, what I can't say. But you know, I had a client, African-American client, shoplifting case, where the officer reached into his car and my client was driving away, and he shot my client. It was a shoplifting case, shoplifting. That wouldn't have happened to me in a shoplifting case. It wouldn't have, even if I rolled the officer's arm up in my window. So the question, the answer to your question is, it does happen. It happens at different levels. You got to call it out. You have to discuss it. And race is always an issue in what I do. I mean, there's structural, there's institutional problems. You know, why did my white 23-year-old suburban girl go home first, the first person out of jail? I couldn't stop it. I had to use that to my advantage. I just stayed silent. I knew what was going on because I have an ethical duty to her, not the system. So, but now I'll use it. If I had a 23-year-old African-American guy, the same charge, same 18 months, I would call the warden and go, why isn't he going home? You know?
Have you seen that over the years that you've worked in the criminal justice system, that racism has either progressed into becoming worse or has decreased on how much it is?
I don't know how to answer. It's always an issue. It's always an issue. You know, in my jury trials, there's something called jury instructions. When you're done, the jury gets a packet of information. They're supposed to rely on that packet to make decisions. One of the instructions is called flight from the police. It says, if you, the jury, find that the defendant engaged in flight from the police, you can hold that against the defendant and make that a factor in his consciousness of guilt, that he knew he was breaking the law. Well, if you're a 16-year-old African-American kid being chased, that's approached by 3 white cops after all the issues in the news, a 16-year-old African-American kid, him leaving the scene isn't because he's guilty, but in his jury trial, he could get that jury instruction. So I guess to answer your question is race is always an issue. So in that case, I kept the instruction out. I had my coworker with me who's a woman of color, and I said, Judge, there are other reasons people run for the police besides consciousness of guilt. And what the law says in Maryland is, if you can present to a judge other reasons someone fled a scene, then the instruction can't be given to the jury. Now, if I didn't have her available to me, I would have put her on the witness stand. She would have said, you know, I'm a 40-year-old African-American woman. You know, growing up, we weren't taught that the police were someone you just stayed still and dealt with. But again, so I think as my profession has gotten more diverse, the issues are talked about, they're called out more, rightfully so, rightfully so.
Okay,
so, and I do a training for my office on language. And again, I told you, I start with that Musselman, but I do a lot about language, and even with interpreters. I tell every one of my interpreters or my clients now, if you don't understand the interpreter, if there's a word choice the interpreter used, and attorneys also assume, if I go see a Vietnamese client or a Guatemalan client, when I tell her you have a right to a jury trial, well, what the hell does that mean? You know, I have to say, I have to do a lot more. People don't realize you have to do a lot more. Is it my racism that prevented me in the past from explaining what a jury is? I don't know. But, you know, I wanted my peers, when I do trainings, to understand that somewhere in Vietnam, where the government is not a democracy, isn't a Western, you know, democracy, jury trials are different. And so the same thing, right to be accused, your right to remain silent. Some Latin American countries, your words can't be used against you. So if you confess to a crime, that's fine, because they're never going to use it against you farther down the road. But I've spent many a time telling a client, guess what? There's not much I can do for you because you told the officer A, B, C, and D. Not that, legally speaking, I mean, they feel good about themselves talking, but you know, they assumed Well, I'm allowed to talk to the police. For me, I work for the government. I'm a government lawyer. So, but I answered your question more broadly, but the fact that you're asking the question, that's the right approach.
Maybe when we can take another student question, and then if Anthony has an alumni question, they're not alumni and student questions. I'm trying to get the person now. And maybe if we have time later, Steve, you can talk about bats and strikes in the picking of the jury. Any other student questions? Those are all been really good ones. I'm glad people are drawing on Steve's experience. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. So I was wondering what your thoughts on the recent inmate release that's going on in the state, especially in Texas, and how, well, not just in Texas, but also like a case where I saw in Florida where a man was released, and then the next couple of days, he was released on drug charges, but the next couple of days he went
Allegedly.
out. And
Allegedly, he killed somebody.
Yes, allegedly. But what do you think about like what should the, like, do you know what the regulations, or like what do you think the regulations should be of the of those inmates who are released due to just the fear of coronavirus spread?
I'm going to answer a kind of backdoor, meaning judges have to make decisions all the time if releasing somebody is worth the risk. So in the context of 1 out of a million may go kill someone, I don't have a problem with that, because I think you have a fundamental right to be free and not be deprived of your liberty. So if a judge errs on the side of sending someone home, I don't have a problem with that. Obviously, I'm not the murder victim or her family. But your question goes to what kind of judge do you want in the community? I sent Jack the article, your governor tried to stop your judiciary from setting free, I think, nonviolent offenders being held in cash bond. I have a problem with cash bond, meaning it's absurd. People are in jail for money. That's just my politics. That's my personal belief. I would have freed them all before the coronavirus. And I'm actually running for a judge spot where I live, and that's one of my issues. It's just fundamentally wrong. But releasing violent criminals because of the virus, I probably would. If your jail is a death sentence, I'd release you. But I'd also release you on an anklet, home monitoring. There are other options that it depends. Is society willing to pay $29.99 a month to put an anklet on you hooked to your cell phone? But someone just sent me that article in the New York Times this morning about that case. It's tragic, don't get me wrong, but would you rather have 10 people die at the local jail or one person die as a murder victim? No one should have to make that choice.
I think that's my question. I also agree with you about cash bond. I actually had to write a like pretty much dissertation on cash bond. So yeah, I also agree with you on that point.
I think Texas uses it.
Yes, we do. Yes, Texas does definitely use cash bonds, very much so, more than personal recognizance and other bond choices.
Of course, Stephen, as students in my class know, if Monica's still there, she can attest to this. When we talk about criminal law, we do all these cases about whether or not you had adequate representation so as to count as not having the lawyer you're entitled to under the Constitution. There are all these Texas cases where the lawyer fell asleep, was drunk, was stoned, wasn't in the courtroom because he was putting quarters in the meter, and the higher courts in Texas are like, that's adequate representation. Hell, if I came to class drunk, stoned, or asleep, no one should say they had a good teacher. They should say they had a drunk or asleep teacher. But that's Texas. So
it's also they may have affirmed the eviction. They may have affirmed the conviction for the person, which is gross. But the person might have been disbarred and never practiced law again. I'd rather have the person practicing law and have that defendant out of jail. But yeah.
Yeah, the cases that involve the attorney, and people know this in statistics by state, lawyers aren't often disciplined for being bad lawyers, and part of it's because lawyers oversee how lawyers are licensed and practice. So, I wish my fellow teachers would say I was a good teacher or not, because if they said I was a bad one, I would say they was a bad one the next time I observed them. So other students want to ask questions, because we've had a couple of really, really good ones, and we still have another 17 minutes.
I'm curious about what you think. I read a lot about people taking gap years to get experience in some sort of law or corporate life before going into law school. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wish I did. That's my primary thought. I wish I did. My peers that did take 1 or 2 years off were better prepared. I also, I mean, I was going to leave Jack with, you should Google Gideon's Promise, the Bronx Public Defender. There are certain programs that, you know, if you agree to be an investigator in a public defender's office for a year in Brooklyn or the Bronx, it's a 1-year commitment. They don't do discovery there. I mean, they don't turn over all the police reports to you. So they hire college kids for a year. You agree only to stay a year, pays you poor, but it's to let you try this stuff on for size. But yeah, if I could, you know, if I could redo it, I wish I took a year and did something totally different. You know, I probably wish I did something language related to become more fluent. You know, in my line of work, you have to be bilingual. So if you're Spanish speaking, you could walk into my office tomorrow. I would definitely take a gap year if I had the opportunity.
And Lauren, if you ask the ABA what's the best major or experience to go to law school, they say reading, writing, computers, language, math, not poli-science. That's not the only path. And there's no risk at all on doing something a little different.
Yeah, mine was studying St. Augustine and modern Hindu thought. And 20 years later, I'm now in jails and prisons every day.
See?
Right.
All you RELS majors. Right. Lauren, you want to say something else? You're still there.
Oh, no, that's just helpful to know. I thought that's what you would say.
And my one classmate that came, that I thought she did something very interesting. She worked at a prosecutor's office for a year, worked at a law firm for a year, and then she ran the New York City Marathon. And then she knew she could do law school.
That's great.
Love it.
Other students, questions? Because we're still 15 minutes out. And if not, maybe we'll get faculty, staff, and alumni to kick in, ask Stephen about his job. I'm wondering about burnout too, Steve, because our sister represented women who were victims of domestic abuse for a long, long time and does family law in Taos, where everyone's been divorced 4 times. And I think there's a lot of burnout in the profession, which a couple of years ago, by profession, it passed medicine and psychiatry as having the highest attrition, that is dropout, and the highest suicide rate. So I'm wondering about the pressure. I mean, I have to grade papers. That's about as stressful as I get, but Stephen deals with people who might lose their liberty, and that's a big deal. So we can.
I mean, I don't know. One, I think we were raised with there, but the grace of God go I. I mean, that's kind of as you approach every day. Not that teaching and being a professor, you can't do that, but you are. You have to be able to step out of it. I have an ability to step out of it. I mean, I joke, you know, it's also, I think, the byproduct of being raised adult child and alcoholic. I think you can remove yourself from circumstances. I'm able to shut down my work at the end of the day. When I represented children in foster care, I used to get the faxes at home at night for the next day. I'd have to go to court the next day. My wife would read some of the faxes. She had to stop. You know, you are dealing with rough things from humanity. You are. That people don't know that exist. But again, you know, I'm doing fundamental constitutional issues every day. So at the end of the day, I feel good about myself. So yeah, you do get burnt out. I mean, don't get me wrong, you do. I don't think I could represent children in foster care for 40 years. I think I did it for 4 or 5, and that was, you know, it was hard.
Anyone else have a question? It doesn't matter what your status, faculty, staff, student. If you're pre-law, why you shouldn't go to law school because you want to keep your immortal soul. Anything?
As they're thinking, you know, my free advice, Jack, again, a lot depends on St. Edwards. If people have an interest in this stuff, internships are key. You know, if you can get alums at your local prosecutor, local public defender's office, or the federal public defender, again, even if you can just give 4 hours a week, I think getting exposed to this puts it in perspective. Why am I studying what I'm studying? How can I use it? Again, I go back to language. If any of your students were here, they'd be in my office tomorrow, you know, helping me with, if they're Spanish speaker, I'd be using that tomorrow. Again, it's a win-win. If you want to see if you have an interest in this, the government agencies, public defender prosecutors' offices want students. So you have to be bold enough to literally just, not now with the virus because we're all working from home, but you got to be able to just walk in the front desk, talk to the receptionist and say to him, hey, I'm interested in volunteering. You'd be amazed about being able to do it. And again, I know St. Edwards is different than some schools that give grants, but there are out there. They're out there if you have a good, you know, your student affairs or alumni office or development office. You know, you may have to start as a first year to land it for your second year summer, but they exist. I wish I had done that stuff too.
We have a career and professional development office where the program's called Handshake, where students can hook up with faculty who are in the profession And, you know, frankly, we have Woody and Lisa Holleran, Karsten Anderson's spouse is a lawyer, John Heaps and religious studies wife is a lawyer. I have lots of, I mean, in addition to Stephen and two of my sibs, lots of former students who are lawyers. So if you want an internship, you know, free labor for learning, that is doable at just a couple phone calls and, you know, maybe showing up, like Stephen said. I had a former student who, Jacques Mercier de Rochette, biked up to the ledge, walked into a senator's office and said, I want to volunteer. And he was working there the next day.
But even your forensic and criminal justice person, that it's so critical to see this outside of a textbook. It just is.
Any other questions for Steve? He's still on his lunch break and wearing a tie and looking professional and everything.
Well, better than the bandana and Clorox wipes I've been wearing all day.
I feel like I'm a SEAL Team 6 like commando going to the grocery store, you know, picking up my 12 items and then rushing out and not touching anybody and, you know, not even like arm bumps. I'm just like, I'm in, I'm out, and take the pizza and beer and go home.
Well, you have age concerns, Jack. You're in a protected class.
I don't think 55 years old counts as a suspect class in the first 14th Amendment, but thank you. Anyone else have questions for Stephen? I could ask him about bats and strikes, or, I mean, the race question was good, the linguistics question. I mean, it's the intersection of everything you got in college. Anyone else, maybe some of our faculty or staff want to ask Stephen his work? You can just unmute your mic and go for it. I mean, I might ask if no one does. All right, well, let's do this because some students here are thinking about law school. Best advice you wish you had? I heard you talk about internships and taking more language classes. What would have gotten you better prepared for your job had you done it 5, 10, 20 years ago?
I think probably taking a gap year, taking a year or two off before going. I think that's important. I think if you know where you want to be geographically in the country, that's important. You know, if you know you want to do a certain kind of work, you know, there's St. Mary's is known for its mock trial stuff. I don't know what % of their students, I think it's in San Antonio, that you have to participate in it. So if you know public speaking is your thing, great. You know, if you want to do death penalty work, you know, you want to go to a school that, you know, that has professors that do that kind of work. You know, if you're a corporate type or a tax person, I mean, so it's kind of, I think those 2 years allow you to figure out, gee, what do I want to do and why? Other thing I would have explored is cost. I would have looked at the JAG programs, big time. I wish I had considered that. I tell people to look at that.
And that's the government program. You should be clear about what a JAG program is.
Yeah, it's let the military pay. You owe them 2 or 3 years, but again, in the long grand scheme of things, 2 or 3 years is nothing. You know.
And if you're a pre-law student here, Stephen's advice and my other siblings and all the people I went to college with and alumni, I have a 20-page, what should I know about law as a profession? I can send that to you. Just email me at jackgm. It probably saved half of those not going, the stress of going, and the other half, it might have cemented their view that it was something for them. I wonder if you can talk, I mean, since we've got a few minutes and no one's jumping in here.
Sorry, wait, I had a question.
Go ahead, Vanessa, go ahead.
So I know, like, I don't know if this is after, you know, this whole COVID-19 is going to change. I know most of us are going to graduate. Do you think that's going to affect jobs? Because I know they're starting to do Zoom. I know in Texas they're starting to do Zoom throughout the trials. Court hearings, and they're just having inmates on the other side of the Zoom, just like us. And then like everyone else is just attorneys and judges, kind of like a courtroom except on Zoom. So I don't know if that's just, is it going to hurt like the future, like us graduating after COVID-19 of jobs?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the nature of legal work has to be done. I think certain professions will cease to exist, but I don't think this is one of them. And again, what I do is constitutionally defined. You can't not have it. You don't have a constitutional right to divorce your spouse. So all divorces are on hold right now because there are no court hearings, but that doesn't affect your liberty, So, I've read articles that summer jobs for law students are on hold just because you can't immediately work from home. I couldn't. I probably could, because I could give you, 300 pages of police reports, have you read it, digest it, process it, give me what your take is on A, B, C, and D. But a law student wants to write some brief, some legal argument that, that's going to be tough for someone to have a summer job from home when the lawyer that they're working for is at home too. So I'm answering your question, both sides of the fence, but I don't think, I think we'll have the vaccine in a year. I talked to
Can I ask
Jack.
a COVID follow-up? Because
Yeah.
what Stephen said about the Constitution mandates this stuff, so the state has to support it. So in a sense, if you're working in a criminal court, you got to have representation, you got to have the Constitution apply. But our sister, who works in Taos as a family custody lawyer, has said, I think she said this on a conference call with Stephen and I, the one downside for her is if you do a Zoom call, you don't have the same ability to represent your client with hand gestures and facial expressions. You can't read the jury as easily. In other words, the stuff you can do in person for your client isn't as developed, or maybe isn't even there on Zoom. I want to ask Stephen, do you think the Zoom takes away some of the tools in your toolkit when you're representing?
Yeah, I can't talk to a client privately. If she's at the jail, I'm in the courthouse. I can't sit here and text her going, don't say this, this isn't in your interest. All that's going to have to adjust until we're back face to face. Yeah, it is a problem. Fortunately, the jail I go to, I can still see my clients in person, but most of my peers can't. They have to call and set up an appointment. Can the person speak freely with a guard outside the door? Are they being, it has affected what I'm doing. But my preference is still in person. I've yet to do a court hearing this way. I know I will. We're doing them over the phone. I haven't done a phone one yet because they're only doing bond reviews in Maryland right now, which is emergencies, or if a kid gets placed into foster care, that's an emergency, or a juvenile that's arrested, they do a detention hearing. But no one's on site. The judge is on site in her office. Her court clerk is there. Maybe a court clerk from the clerk's office documenting stuff, but
Here we go. I want to share, Stephen, because I've got them here, other stuff that we're doing, and you can get all this stuff on ethicsonthehilltop.org. So thank you, Stephen, for doing that. Mark Graves is up next on the 22nd. He's a Notre Dame scholar that works on artificial intelligence, psychology, moral theology, sort of interesting intersection of AI and ethics and religion. Again, ethicsonthehilltop.org, but same thing that we're doing here with Steve. And then we have a fellow that used to go to St. Ed's. He's here for a year, but he lives in Paris, and he's a journalist that covers comic books. I want that job so bad. I want to be able to go talk about comic books on the 28th. And then we have a Fusion lunchtime group on the 29th. We're going to read about anger, and maybe anger actually has some positive benefits. Again, ethicsonthehilltop.org. Maybe have time for one more question. Anybody? If not, we'll just thank Stephen, and again, Denise and Sherry for putting this on, because this is the way we're going to do things. I want people to have access to the way.
One question?
Yeah, Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, just what you were talking about on using these media for courtroom proceedings. What do you think the quality of the process is with these refugees who are required to stay across the border and have to have their trials by remote control, as it were?
I find it disgusting, but I think it's going to withstand scrutiny. Because those are civil in nature, you don't have a confrontation. You don't have a right, constitutional right, to face your accuser. It's a civil process where the government. It's also a one branch process that your rights are defined by the government agency that's prosecuting you in immigration court. It's a weird animal.
Yeah, it's not adversarial, right? Because there's really nobody unless you.
It is, but it's adversarials that all work for the same sovereign. Yeah,
and I'd love to be my own judge. That would be awesome. I'd get great teaching reviews, and all my publications would be A1. That's a good question, Anthony. I'm also, I'm not an attorney, but I get to teach some of this stuff. It's reprehensible that people.
Except it's a win if you're a refugee in Bosnia, you want to come to the U.S. Your hearing can be had in Bosnia.
Actually, that's an upside, right? No, that's true. Anyone else? We've got all of 2 minutes. If not, Stephen, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and students, especially, hopefully it was helpful for you and everybody else. Appreciate you coming. ethicsonthehilltop.org. This is how we're going to do things. We want faculty, staff, students, alums, friends, family members, everybody. Appreciate your time, and come back for the next one and the next one and the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Catherine, everybody.